If you enjoy powerful stories about justice and consequences, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss these incredible true tales. Now let's begin this shocking story. Rebecca Sullivan had been having the worst day of her life. The 42-year-old investment banker from New York had flown to London for what was supposed to be an important business meeting. But everything had gone wrong from the moment she landed. Her luggage was lost, her hotel reservation was somehow canceled, and the client she flew across the Atlantic to meet had postponed their appointment at the last minute, standing in the summer heat outside Buckingham Palace. Rebecca's frustration had reached a breaking point. She had come here to clear her head, to do something touristy while she figured out how to salvage her disastrous trip. But the crowds were overwhelming. People kept bumping into her, and her expensive shoes were killing her feet. She was tired, jet-lagged, and her carefully controlled life was falling apart when a tour group accidentally knocked her designer bag to the ground. Spilling its contents across the cobblestones, something inside Rebecca snapped. She screamed at the tourists, her voice shrill with rage. People stared at her, some with concern, others with judgment. Rebecca didn't care. She was done pretending to be calm and composed. Years of stress, pressure, and maintaining a perfect professional image came pouring out in waves of anger. A royal guard stood nearby at his post. Guardsman Michael Foster, a 26-year-old member of the Grenadier Guards. He had been standing at attention for over an hour, maintaining his professional composure despite the heat and the chaos of the tourist crowds. Michael had served 3 years in the British Army, including a deployment to Mali, where he had helped train local security forces and participated in peacekeeping operations. Rebecca noticed. Perfectly still, his face expressionless. In her rage-filled mind, he became a symbol of everything that was wrong with her day. Here she was, falling apart, and this person just stood there like nothing mattered. She convinced herself that he was mocking her with his silence, judging her with his stillness. Her rational mind had completely shut down, replaced by pure fury. "Are you just going to stand there?" Rebecca shouted at Michael, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Other tourists turned to watch, sensing trouble. Michael, following his training, remained motionless and silent. His lack of response only fueled Rebecca's rage. She interpreted his professional discipline as personal disrespect, his duty as arrogance. In that moment, Rebecca made a decision that would change her life forever. Rebecca stormed toward the guard, her face red with anger. Security personnel immediately noticed her aggressive approach and began moving in her direction, but Rebecca was too quick. Before anyone could intervene, she had crossed the barrier and reached Michael. In a moment of complete irrationality, driven by rage she couldn't control, Rebecca lunged at the guard and wrapped her hands around his neck. Attempting to choke him, what happened next occurred in a blur of motion. Michael's training activated instantly. Despite the shock of being physically attacked, his military conditioning took over. In one smooth defensive movement, he broke Rebecca's grip using a technique designed to counter choke attempts. The motion was so swift and precise that Rebecca barely understood what was happening before she found herself spun around. Her arms secured behind her back. Within seconds, armed response officers surrounded them, their weapons drawn. Rebecca was forced to the ground, her face pressed against the pavement as multiple officers restrained her. The realization of what she had just done hit her like a physical blow. The rage that had consumed her evaporated instantly, replaced by shock and terror. She had just attacked a soldier, in front of hundreds of witnesses, at one of the most protected locations in the United Kingdom. Michael maintained his hold on Rebecca until the officers took over. Then he stepped back and resumed a ready stance. His neck was red where Rebecca's fingers had gripped him, but he showed no emotion, no anger, no fear. He simply waited for his superior officer to arrive and give him instructions. Years of military discipline had prepared him for unexpected situations. He had responded exactly as trained. Rebecca was handcuffed and pulled roughly to her feet. The crowd of tourists had grown massive, dozens of phones capturing every moment. Rebecca could hear the clicks of camera shutters, the whispers and gasps from the crowd. She tried to speak, to explain that She didn't know what had come over her, but the officers weren't listening. They were treating her as a serious threat, which is exactly what she had become the moment. She attacked a member of the Queen's Guard as she was led away by armed police. Rebecca caught a glimpse of Michael returning to his post. Even after being attacked, even with visible marks on his neck, he stood at attention with the same unwavering professionalism. The contrast between his composure and her complete loss of control made Rebecca feel sick with shame. She had prided herself on being successful, professional, and in control. Now she was being arrested like a common criminal. The security building where Rebecca was taken was cold and austere. She was placed in an interrogation room and told to wait. Her hands shook as the adrenaline wore off and reality set in. She was in a foreign country, facing criminal charges for attacking a military officer. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for was in jeopardy because of 60 seconds of uncontrolled rage. 2 Metropolitan Police detectives entered the room and informed Rebecca of the charges she was facing: assault on a military officer, assault with intent to cause harm, breaching security at a protected site, and public disorder. The list seemed to go on forever. Each charge carried serious penalties, and together they could mean years in prison. Rebecca felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The detectives showed Rebecca footage from multiple security cameras and tourist phones. The videos clearly showed her crossing the barrier, attacking Michael, and attempting to choke him. There was no way to deny what had happened or claim it was an accident. Her actions were captured from every angle in crystal clear detail. One detective pointed out that attempting to strangle someone was considered a particularly serious form of assault under British law. Rebecca tried to explain that she had been having a bad day, that the stress had overwhelmed her, that she wasn't thinking clearly. The detectives listened without sympathy. One of them, a woman in her 50s, leaned forward and spoke in a tone that was both stern and almost pitying. She explained that thousands of people had bad days in London every single day. None of them attacked royal guards. Rebecca's stress was not an excuse, it was an explanation. And there was a significant difference. The other detective added that in today's security environment, any physical attack on a guard at a royal residence was treated with extreme seriousness. They couldn't know if Rebecca was acting alone or if she was part of a larger threat. Her actions had triggered a massive security response that involved dozens of personnel and had temporarily disrupted operations at one of Britain's most important national symbols. An official from the American embassy arrived and spoke with Rebecca briefly. The conversation was professional but cold. The official explained that the embassy could ensure she received fair treatment under British law but could not protect her from prosecution. The official also mentioned that cases like this created diplomatic complications and reflected poorly on American visitors. Rebecca had the impression that the embassy was more annoyed than concerned about her situation. Left alone again, Rebecca had time to think about what had led to this moment. She had spent years building her career working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing personal relationships and her own well-being to climb the corporate ladder. The pressure had been building for years, but she had convinced herself she could handle it. She had been wrong. One bad day, one moment of lost control, and everything she had worked for was gone. Hours passed before a senior official entered to speak with Rebecca about what would happen next. Guardsman Foster had been consulted about pressing charges. Given the nature of the attack, particularly the attempt to choke him, Michael had every right to pursue serious assault charges. The official explained that choking was considered especially dangerous because it could cause serious injury or death within minutes. Rebecca would face the full weight of British justice. Rebecca was formally charged and informed she would appear before a magistrate the following morning. She was held overnight in a police cell, a small concrete room with a metal bench and no windows. She had never been in trouble with the law before, never even received a speeding ticket. Now she was locked in a cell in a foreign country, facing the possibility of years in prison for a crime she committed in broad daylight in front of hundreds of witnesses. That night was the longest of Rebecca's life. She couldn't sleep on the hard bench, couldn't stop her mind from racing through the consequences of her actions. She thought about her job, which she would certainly lose. She thought about her elderly parents who would be ashamed and heartbroken. She thought about the guard she had attacked, a young man who had been doing his job when she assaulted him for no reason other than her own inability to control her emotions. The next morning, Rebecca was brought before a magistrate. She had been assigned a court-appointed solicitor, who explained that given the seriousness of the charges and the clear video evidence, her best option was to plead guilty and hope for leniency. The magistrate listened as the prosecution outlined the charges and presented the overwhelming evidence against Rebecca. When asked to enter her plea, Rebecca stood and admitted her guilt. Her voice shook as she apologized to the court, to Guardsman Foster, and to everyone her actions had affected. She explained her state of mind without making excuses, acknowledging that nothing justified what she had done. The magistrate listened with a stern expression. Taking notes as Rebecca spoke, the prosecution argued for a custodial sentence, emphasizing the seriousness of attempting to choke a military officer on duty. The defense argued for leniency, pointing out Rebecca's previously clean record, her immediate remorse, and her guilty plea. The magistrate adjourned to consider the sentence, and Rebecca was returned to the holding cell to wait for what might be the most important decision of her life. 2 hours later, Rebecca was brought back to the courtroom. The magistrate delivered the sentence with grave authority. Rebecca was convicted on all charges. She was sentenced to 6 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, meaning she would not serve time immediately, but would if she committed any other offense. She was also ordered to pay a substantial fine, perform 200 hours of community service. It was banned from all royal properties for 10 years. Additionally, and perhaps most significantly, Rebecca was required to attend anger management counseling and undergo psychological evaluation. The magistrate stated clearly that Rebecca's attack had been driven by uncontrolled rage, and she posed a danger to others until she addressed her underlying issues. The sentence was both punishment and an attempt at rehabilitation, giving Rebecca a chance to avoid prison while forcing her to confront her problems. Rebecca was released from custody, but required to remain in London until her community service was completed. She had to arrange for extended leave from her job, though she suspected she would be fired regardless. She contacted her supervisor and explained the situation, omitting no details. The conversation was brief and painful. Her supervisor said they would discuss her employment status when she returned, but the tone suggested Rebecca should prepare for termination. The community service Rebecca was assigned involved working at a crisis center for people experiencing mental health emergencies. The coordinator, a compassionate woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, explained that Rebecca would be helping people who had lost control in various ways. People struggling with anger, stress, and emotional regulation. It was not random placement. The court had specifically chosen this assignment to help Rebecca understand her own issues. Rebecca's first days at the crisis center were humbling. She met people from all walks of life who were struggling with mental health challenges. Some had lost jobs, relationships, or freedom because they couldn't control their emotions or actions. Rebecca saw herself in many of their stories. She had always considered herself superior to people who couldn't handle their problems, but now she was one of them. Court ordered to be there because of her own failure to cope. Dr. Mitchell also supervised Rebecca's mandatory counseling sessions. In these sessions, Rebecca was forced to confront truths she had been avoiding for years. She had built her identity around being successful and in control. But beneath that facade, she was drowning in stress, anxiety, and suppressed anger. The attack on Guardsman Foster wasn't an isolated incident of rage. It was the culmination of years of ignored warning signs. Through counseling, Rebecca learned that her need for control came from deep-seated insecurity. Her aggressive pursuit of career success was an attempt to prove her worth to herself and others. When things went wrong on that day in London, and her carefully controlled world started crumbling, her mind couldn't process the failure. The attack on the guard was her psyche lashing out at a world that refused to conform to her expectations. 1 month into her community service, Rebecca had an unexpected visitor. Guardsman Michael Foster, now in civilian clothes, came to the crisis center. He had been contacted by Dr. Mitchell. He thought a conversation between Rebecca and the man she had attacked might be therapeutic for both of them. Michael had agreed to meet, though he was under no obligation to do so. The conversation was awkward at first. Rebecca apologized profusely, tears streaming down her face as she tried to express her remorse for what she had done. Michael listened patiently, then shared his own perspective. He explained that the attack hadn't traumatized him, significantly because his training had prepared him to handle such situations. What concerned him more was understanding what had driven Rebecca to such an extreme action. Michael talked about his own struggles with stress during his military service, about times when the pressure had seemed overwhelming. He explained that everyone had breaking points, but the key was recognizing the warning signs before reaching them. He asked Rebecca what signs she had ignored in the months and years before the attack. The question forced Rebecca to confront uncomfortable truths about her lifestyle and choices. The conversation lasted over an hour, and by the end, both felt a sense of understanding. Michael wasn't excusing what Rebecca had done, but he recognized that she was a person who had made a terrible mistake, not a monster. Rebecca gained insight into the humanity of the man she had attacked, understanding that her actions had affected a real person with his own life, struggles, and concerns. Before leaving, Michael said something that stayed with Rebecca. He told her that the military had taught him that strength wasn't about never falling down or never losing control. Strength was about how you responded after you fell, about whether you learned from your mistakes and became better. He hoped Rebecca would use this experience to become stronger and wiser, not just more bitter or broken. Rebecca completed her 200 hours of community service over the following months. She continued her counseling even after it was no longer court-mandated. She began to make fundamental changes in her life, learning to set boundaries at work, to ask for help when overwhelmed, and to recognize when her stress levels were becoming dangerous. The Crisis Center offered her a volunteer position after her service ended, and she accepted. When Rebecca finally returned to New York, her employer did terminate her position. But instead of being devastated, Rebecca felt a strange sense of relief. She had been unhappy in that high-pressure environment for years, but hadn't admitted it to herself. She found work at a non-profit organization focused on mental health advocacy, accepting a significant pay cut but gaining peace of mind and purpose. Rebecca became an advocate for mental health awareness, particularly around anger management and stress-related issues. She spoke at support groups about her experience, holding nothing back about her attack on the Royal Guard and the consequences she faced. Her story resonated with people who struggled with similar issues. She found meaning in helping others avoid the mistakes she had made. Years after the incident, Rebecca maintained contact with both Dr. Mitchell and Michael Foster. Dr. Mitchell became a mentor and friend, guiding Rebecca as she built a new life focused on well-being rather than achievement. Michael occasionally emailed to check on her progress, their unlikely connection serving as a reminder that even the worst moments could lead to positive change if handled correctly. The suspended sentence hung over Rebecca for 2 years, but she never violated its terms. When the suspension period ended, she felt genuine pride in having completed her sentence successfully and having used the experience to transform her life. The 10-year ban from royal properties meant nothing to her now. She had no desire to return to the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. Rebecca often reflected on that terrible day outside Buckingham Palace. The 60 seconds of rage that led to her attacking Guardsman Foster had felt like the end of her world at the time. In many ways, it had been the end of her old world. The world where she pretended to have everything under control, while slowly falling apart inside. But it had also been the beginning of a new world. One where she was honest about her struggles and committed to genuine healing. The justice Rebecca received wasn't just legal punishment. It was the opportunity to face herself, to acknowledge her problems, and to make real changes. Michael Foster had shown her mercy by not pursuing the maximum charges. But more importantly, he had shown her that people could move past their worst moments. The Crisis Center had taught her that struggling with mental health didn't make someone weak or worthless. The counseling had given her tools to manage her emotions constructively. What had started as pure rage and ended in pure justice became, ultimately, a story of redemption and growth. Rebecca had tried to choke a royal guard in a moment of uncontrolled fury. And what happened next wasn't just punishment but transformation. She had learned that true strength came not from never losing control, but from taking responsibility when you did, from facing consequences with honesty, and from using your worst moment as motivation to become your best self. The justice she received saved her life in ways a simple prison sentence never could have, forcing her to confront and change rather than simply suffer and return unchanged to the world that had broken her.